Alright, so I got a pretty hilarious update here for you guys on the follow-up to those presidential elections down in Brazil that we have been covering, where the left-wing candidate Lula da Silva managed to successfully take down the far-right fascist Jair Bolsonaro, and there was sort of a period of time where we were waiting to see whether or not Bolsonaro and his supporters would try to pull off some sort of a coup attempt or an attempt to stay in power in one way or another, and he kind of went like dead silent there for a little bit. We had that clip that we went through on this channel of him literally shutting down all of the lights in the palace and I guess going off to his bedroom and crying himself to sleep. And dude was definitely down bad for a while there, but it looks like now, even though the process for the transition of power has already started, and I think Lula is actually set to officially take power in January of next year, we now have a follow-up to this in which Jair Bolsonaro basically decided that he would, similar to Donald Trump here in the 2020 election, officially try to legally challenge the results of these elections and allege fraud. So I got a little bit of a breakdown here from Reuters in terms of what this election challenge was actually looking like, and then we're going to get into the follow-up and the result of this challenge that he put forward, which is just absolutely hilarious and amazing. So here from Reuters, they say Bolsonaro challenges the Brazil election that he lost to Lula. So what are they talking about here? They say Brazilian President Jair Bolsonaro has challenged the election that he lost last month to leftist rival Luiz Inácio Lula da Silva, arguing votes from some machines should be invalidated in a complaint that election authorities met with initial skepticism, probably because he didn't have a single lick of evidence, again, similar to how Donald Trump was just baselessly claiming election fraud, and how, Venezuelan scary communists worked with other global international coalitions to try to rig the Dominion voting machines, and all of these different bizarre conspiracies and lies that they came up with here. Basically looks like they used the exact same playbook down in Brazil. So they say that Bolsonaro's claims seem unlikely to get far, as Lula's victory has been ratified by the Superior Electoral Court and acknowledged by Brazil's leading politicians and international allies. Still, it could fuel a small but committed protest movement that has so far refused to accept the results. So that's just basically what happened, again, making completely baseless claims that even the court system within Brazil was not really buying from the beginning of this. And honestly, they handled this entire process with Jair Bolsonaro significantly better than we handled Donald Trump, and obviously in the lead up to January 6th and this attempted insurrection, as sloppy as it was. So that's just the basic rundown in terms of like what he was alleging and what he was trying to do. And of course, when I draw these comparisons to the United States, it's not just because I'm some like Westoid who can't, get my head out of, US focused politics or anything like that. It's actually because there is direct overlap between a lot of these operatives that worked with Donald Trump to try to steal a 2020 election in the United States, and who then proceeded to go and try to help Jair Bolsonaro do the exact same thing in Brazil. So here from Business Insider, they say Trump aides are helping Brazil's president to dispute the results of the election that he just lost, and it is going terribly. So basically you had guys like Jason Miller down here and Steve Bannon as well, who's just an absolute ridiculous fascist psychopath who's trying to form some sort of a far-right global international coalition. He's been relatively successful in doing this, but it looks like it's definitely going to be a failure down in Brazil unless something dramatic ends up changing. But essentially, again, you had them meeting with members of the Bolsonaro family, them trying to give advice in terms of how they should try to bring these court cases and what rhetoric they should be using to try to drum up anger among their supporters. And so you had this similar overlap between the United States and Brazil, this far-right coalition acting in solidarity to try to make sure that the leftist candidate Lula da Silva is not able to actually take power. And a couple other things that you got to keep in mind here. First of all, they pointed out back in this Reuters article down here that there was leading politicians within Brazil, the elites within Brazil to some extent, maybe some military officials as well as international allies. Now, when they say international allies, they mean basically the entire global community that immediately accepted these results as fair and legitimate. But specifically, it was pretty important at the time that Joe Biden was one of the first people to actually come out and congratulate Lula on the victory, and not even give any breathing room for Bolsonaro to sort of run these claims in the immediate aftermath of the election. And I mean, keep in mind, the United States, obviously our centuries-long history of meddling in Central and South America, and specifically within the country of Brazil just decades ago, backing their far-right fascist military dictatorship. And so, we don't have the best track record, to say the least, when it comes to supporting incumbent or supporting insurgent left-wing candidates and administrations when they look like they are about to take power. But thankfully, again, the bare fucking minimum that you could possibly ask for. But Joe Biden did come out, congratulate Lula, and I think behind the scenes, probably you could fairly say that some U.S. State Department or maybe even like intelligence apparatus officials or leaders were sort of going behind the scenes and letting people know within the Brazilian hierarchy, within their top military brass, within their intelligence communities and all of that, that we weren't just going to let him do a straight up brazen military coup attempt. And so Joe Biden coming out and aggressively immediately congratulating Lula and saying that the election was legitimate, that basically took a lot of wind out of the potential sails for some sort of a coup attempt that Jair Bolsonaro might have been doing. So I think that that's a key part of this. But the other thing that I would say about this is that, Jair Bolsonaro's supporters who are, have been absolutely down bad recently over the last couple of weeks in the aftermath of him losing the election, these people were ready to go, right? I mean, in the immediate aftermath of the election, when it was called for Lula, they did start taking out, they started going out into the streets, they started protesting, they started having massive rallies. You had a lot of people, I guess, in the industrial sectors that, like truckers and things like that, who were also trying to get in on this and doing roadblocks and all of these different things to try to rally support around Bolsonaro. We also had this absolutely hilarious thing, which I'll play just a little bit of this clip so you can get a picture of what's going on here. So basically we got some, coping and seething Bolsonaro supporters who are, I guess, following in a similar vein to what, QAnon conspiracy theorists get into, but putting their phones on their heads and doing, I guess, like sort of a SOS signal to potential extraterrestrial life to come in and save the day. I mean, this is how down bad Bolsonaro and his movement actually are right now. I mean, they're literally trying to call for some sort of a beyond the Earth realm coalition to come in and save him and keep him as the president. So I mean, absolutely hilarious. You'd love to see it. Hopefully, there is no actual like legitimate violence that becomes widespread as this transition to the Lula government ends up continuing. And again, we had this follow-up here, which is the absolutely best part of this story by far. So he files all of these election challenges. His supporters are up in arms. He's using all of this rhetoric, completely baselessly alleging that there was some sort of widespread election fraud. And now we have the result from the Brazilian courts. So here from Axios, they say Brazil court fines Bolsonaro allies over $4 million for bad faith election challenge. Okay, so I mean, this is something that I wish we could have seen in the 2020 election, because how many lawsuits did the Trump administration actually file at the end of the day? I mean, what, like upwards of over 60 court cases, and I think only one of them actually fell in their favor, and it was on some procedural bullshit that didn't actually even matter at the end of the day. But we're talking about dozens and dozens of court filings that were put in place completely in bad faith. I mean, you had Rudy Giuliani going around in all of these different courtrooms getting laughed out by even some right-wing and Trump-appointed judges. So, I mean, it was a complete joke, and it was obviously bad faith, but they never really, had any material or financial consequences for engaging in that and literally trying to overthrow democracy with their bad faith litigation. But I mean, I guess you could say that, Rudy Giuliani was disbarred in the state of New York, and so he had some personal consequences. Obviously, he's just busy getting absolutely trashed and drunk every day and going on like Newsmax and OAN News. So, I mean, he's doing, whatever he's going to do for the rest of his short life that he has left. But I mean, in Brazil, obviously they have a little bit of a better wraparound in terms of immediately imposing consequences for doing this type of bad faith litigation to try to overthrow a democratic election result. But just a little bit of details here. They say Brazil's electoral court fined parties in outgoing President Jair Bolsonaro's government on Wednesday after they challenged his presidential election loss to leftist leader Luiz Inácio Lula da Silva last month. They say Supreme Court Justice Alexandre de Moraes, I guess I'm absolutely butchering that name, de Moraes, who heads the electoral electoral court rejected the challenge and issued a fine totaling 22.9 million Brazilian currency, which is equivalent obviously to $4.227 million for bad faith litigation, and ruled government funds for the Liberal Party coalition must be suspended until the penalty is paid. So that's pretty intense ruling there. And they got a quote here from him saying, the complete bad faith of the plaintiff's bizarre and illicit request was proven both by the refusal to add to the initial petition and the total absence of any evidence of irregularities and the existence of a totally fraudulent narrative of facts, wrote De Moraes in his ruling. Okay, so I mean, he just completely eviscerated his scorched earth approach here to responding to these litigation efforts, right? I mean, there was no actual underlying evidence of election fraud, similar to how there was no widespread evidence of election fraud here in the United States. So, I mean, again, we've been tracking with this election. Thankfully, Lula ended up pulling it out at the end of the day. It was much closer than a lot of us thought that it was going to be, but it looks like, with the help of the United States putting pressure on the Brazilian sort of like higher ups, and with the entire international global community immediately recognizing these election results as fair and legitimate, with all of these processes continuing to take place, even though Bolsonaro and his supporters are not happy with it, and they're out here coping and seething to the maximum degree possible. It looks like, this is going to be a fair and legitimate transfer of power that we're going to see in a couple months here. So, I mean, obviously, we got to keep our eye on this because, these supporters, a lot of them, are willing to go to bat and actually legitimately take to the streets and fight for Jair Bolsonaro to stay in power. So, there obviously is still that potential for a future political violence or attacks or some sort of a January 6th style insurrection attempt. But as of right now, it looks like, Brazilian institutions are standing strong against these bad faith attempts, and even going so far as to legitimately push financial penalties on these people for trying to overturn this legitimate election.
Everyone is saying good Politic guy has the best Politic. Believe me, no one does it like him. Believe me, everyone is saying